Welcome everyone to lecture 5. Hopefully you got your little notepad out, maybe some coffee so you can make it through this lecture, and you're ready to talk about production design with me. What is production design? Well, that's a great question. You may not have asked it, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Production design is everything you are seeing within the frame. Everything that a character is wearing, what they're driving, the building they go into, the look of that building, everything that you are seeing visually, a production designer has taken part in deciding what will go within the frame. Now, the director is going to sit down with the production designer and the DP and talk about the look, the overall feel of the film, where they want to go with it, what it's about, all those things that you can imagine when they sit down and talk about. That's what they're going to do. And then the production designer takes their notes and their script and they go out and they do it and they put it together in collaboration with a director. It is something that you almost don't realize. Hollywood does a lot of things where it's like you're not supposed to be aware that you're watching a film. You should be immersed in the film. So generally speaking, we don't stop and say, oh, hey, that production design looks great. You're just in the world. You're just living the experience. But since we're academics, dang it, we're going to really focus in on what am I seeing, and what are they trying to say by what I'm seeing. We're going to dissect it down a little bit. So what the production designer does, they supervise the design of a film's visual environments. They collaborate with the director and the cinematographer. Your production designer has to be a really smart person, probably one of the smartest people on the set next to the director in terms of knowledge of what's going on with the story. So they're going to get the script. They're going to talk about the visualization, the look. They're going to set a budget. They're going to create sketches. They're going to pre-visualize. This can be things done on a computer. Any kind of pre-visualization that shows what you want. They're going to scout locations. They're going to supervise the production crew, which there's a lot of crew that works with the production designer in creating the overall look. So the production designer is going to really shape the feel of the film, the tangible, the physical, the touchable things that go into it. Disciplines of the production designer, like I said, they have to be smart. They have to know that script backwards, forwards. They got to know the era. They got to know everything they can to help make that film be as authentic as it can be in whatever realm it's supposed to be in, whether that's a very realistic setting or maybe something like science fiction. But anything you can think of, pretty much a production designer should know about it to some degree in the world of film. So things you might not even consider, like psychology, technology, architecture, any of those things, interior design, those are all going to come into play for a production designer to research and then to implement within the film. Here's a cool example of how expensive production design can be. There's a little line here going down what we'll say is the entirety of a budget of a film, from conceptualization to marketing. So we can kind of see on this side of things, this is all production elements. This is where that money, half the money is going, is to this production design. Just to give you a kind of overview of how important and how expensive the art department, the production designer, is for a film. So people that fall within the production designer's jurisdiction, as it were, the people that they're in charge of, they have a coordinator, production coordinator. They're kind of managing aspects, the bureaucrat of the art department. Then you have other members like digital artists, set designers, set decorator, greensmen, greens people, anybody who brings in trees, bushes, shrubs, anything like that helps going to augment the scene. They have people just for that, prop masters, costume designers, construction, stunts, visual effects, all these things that can kind of go under the art department. Watch the credits of a film, and if it looks like somebody who's been a laborer in a specific area of a tangible, practical aspect of the film, that's under production design. Now you have a production designer and an art director. Production designer creates the visual concept, the design of everything, and the art director goes out and executes what's being done. So similar to an architect who designs it and the general contractor who builds it. All right, so here is a little example of we're gonna do something fun here. This is an excerpt from The Matrix. I want you to read it. Look for the very specific verbiage that's used within the script that if you were the production designer, you would say, I might want to highlight this area. I might want to remember this very descriptive usage or phrasing that really puts something in my mind. And then we're going to see how the production designer took this and put it into practice. So go ahead and pause it here and read this part of the script, and then let's talk about some of those key words that you saw, and then let's see how they executed it. So go ahead and pause. Okay, we're back. Hopefully you paused. Maybe you didn't. If not, the we're back is odd. All right, so some things that jumped out at me. Some phrasing, overgrown with technology, weed-like cables coil everywhere, cannibalized equipment that lay open like an autopsied corpse. This rat nest of technology. Very, very strong language that if you were going to be designing this room, this set, you got a lot to work with. So here's the execution. We can see Neo's room. We can see the cable and the coils and the design of the room that really, I think, encapsulates the words that were written very well. I mean, it's almost perfect execution from script to script. So production designer is going to read that, then they're going to come up with this. We've talked about mise-en-scène before, that placement of objects in the frame in front of the camera. So what the camera is seeing. It's so important. That's the lifeblood of the production designer. That's what they do. That's how they help make the scene come alive. So scenery and costumes help to define the visual elements of the environment, time of day, types of characters, maybe even the progression or changes in the character or the environment at a given time. So we have an idea of a unified design. The way you can kind of think of this can be related to a character, a group of characters, or the film as a whole. So let's look at an example really quick from Spider-Man. Okay, we have the Parkers. We have their location of where they live, not only of their house, but the community that they're in, their costumes, the interior design of the house, all let you know who these people are. Down to earth, middle class, sort of good, wholesome people. The architecture represents it, the interior design represents it, the costuming designs it, even little details. He's got his sleeves rolled. You see politicians do that. That's their way of, I'm a common man, I'm going to roll my sleeves. So this is kind of a working class sort of look, very clean, wholesome people. And that's what they were supposed to be in the movie. Their actions said that. It made you believe, okay, this is who they are. Go in the wrong direction. All right. And then we counter that with the Green Goblin, who lives in this luxurious, apartment overlooking the city, very grandiose, lots of color with a lot of deep texture, a lot of wealth behind it. So this unified design really kind of gives you an idea of who these characters are, what they're about, and their actions back it up. So when reading the script, the production designer and the director talk about these characters, who they are, based on the actions that these characters take. That's where you really get to know who a character is by the decisions they make. And then you could start to build the look, the environment, and all those things around what they know the character to be. Specifically, even at a given moment. I mean, the environment can change based on what's going on in the character's life. We'll talk about that when we get to costumes. Go back just a little. Make sure I put everything there. So again, things in this unified design, the interplay of all design elements within a shot, the layouts of sets, the architecture, the coloring and texture, costumes. Start looking for these things as you're watching. Really pause it at times. Look and see. I know I've seen some people that will, if they're in a location with a lot of pictures on the wall, I know I've seen some people, they will analyze every single picture on the wall to try and come up with some kind of meaning, or maybe they'll find something, some sort of connection between this little mundane detail that nobody else would notice. And they've used it to bring a cohesion of meaning from the film. So really pay attention to that at any given moment. A lot of times films will start with this visual concept, an image that defines the central idea of a movie. Core images provide a coherence and continuity. It's the aesthetic glue that holds it together. So that's kind of like when you're designing a room. Maybe you went to the store and you bought a really fancy, nice lamp, and it had all this nice color and things with it. And then you said, I'm going to design this whole room based around this lamp. Kind of a similar thing when we're talking about film. We're going to take some visual concepts, some ideas. We're going to base a lot around that idea. The look, the feel, the color, the tone, everything. So over here we see this, the thumbs down was used for Gladiator to help give idea and shape and scope. Where if you watch the film, you're like, I can see this. I can see these elements kind of going with it. Same with the graphic novel Sin City. Taking the image, now how do we translate that to film? Granted, that was a graphic novel, so they had a lot of images to go off of, but a centering point to say this is going to give the look of the film, that's going to help give it meaning, that's going to help to heighten the experience from start to finish for the audience. So we also have style. Some of these terms are a bit ambiguous, but the overall style of a film can be expressed in its degree of reality. And with this, we're talking about things like space, line and shape, tone, color, texture, movement. Maybe this is better explained by thinking of in terms of genre or the degree of that genre. So things like fantasy, science fiction, expressionism, which we could say modern equivalent to horror. There's varying degrees of all of these. There's a spectrum of fantasy and reality that any genre could play at any moment, and it's just knowing where is that degree. It's also knowing that expectation of your audience. When I go to a fantasy film like Moulin Rouge, although I'll admit I don't ever think I've seen Moulin Rouge, I've seen enough of it to know the grandiose production design lived up to what you would expect. So this very whimsical, bright, colorful environment, especially for a musical. And then same thing with science fiction. We want a heightened fantasy, a heightened element away from sort of a realism with it. Can science fiction have that realism to it? Sure, of course. It's just knowing where on that spectrum does it lie. And that's, again, something the production designers are going to talk about. But then you take a Clint Eastwood film like $1 Million Baby that's supposed to be, set in or around present day and be kind of adhering to what we would expect from a realistic portrayal of that time and that place. So nothing is grandiose, nothing is um, over the top. It's how we experience reality. Excuse me, need a drink of coffee here. But knowing where that spectrum lies at any moment between fantasy and reality. Uh, this visual style says something about what's going on within a character and how they interact with their environment. So we have sort of these competing environments in Edward Scissorhands. A little bit of this fish out of water concept when he goes from the dark, cavernous emptiness to sort of suburbia, and how those worlds sort of conflict. So it's kind of a dynamic production design where they're clashing together. So along this spectrum, we can think of it in terms of historical realism in the design as well. So some films set out to be very authentic, like Titanic. Sometimes these historical styles can be exaggerated or spoofed, like Dick Tracy, Dracula, things like that. So again, where does it lie on that spectrum? So as far as the physical environment of where the camera's rolling, we have sets, we have locations. Sets are physically built spaces designed specifically for the film. So why do you choose to build something versus going somewhere and doing it? Well, it depends on so many things, but things to consider. Is it a historical reconstruction that no longer exists, like Titanic? They're going to rebuild sets of the different rooms, whatever, the boat itself. Maybe it doesn't exist anywhere. Something like Star Wars, perhaps, like that, right? We're going to have to build sets. We're not flying in space. So we need these rooms. And oftentimes those sets, they'll shoot a lot that can be done in one area. They'll kind of move it around so it looks different, yet it's the same, shoot all the stuff there. So sometimes there's kind of cost effectiveness that goes into it. Maybe some locations you don't have access to, or maybe that location is really, really expensive to shoot it. It all depends in what's going to be easier. If you have a film that takes place largely in, say, somebody's house, different rooms in the house, well, it might be better to build that set where you have access to it. You don't have to worry about noises if you're in a sound stage, things like that. So it just depends. Locations are the real space. They can be augmented, changed, added to for the needs of the film. It oftentimes is cheaper to pay to rent the space, a house, an office, building, whatever, than to actually build it. I know, I think it was Scrubs, the TV show Scrubs. There was a hospital that was going to get demolished, and rather than demolish it, they paid to use it. Don't quote me on it. Pretty sure that's what I heard, though. And again, sometimes locations, it doesn't have to be the actual location mentioned in the story, just kind of have a similar feel. So it just depends, but that's something a production designer and director are going to talk about. Do you want to shoot on location? Do you want to build a set? A lot of things will go into that: time, money, all sorts of decision. Now, sometimes sets or locations are emphasized with what we'll call mats, which add depth to what's being filmed. So it's something added on to. You'll probably know this mostly as green screening, which is very common in filming today. I was actually a Starfleet cadet in the first of the new Star Trek movies. And I remember we were shooting in a blimp hangar, and there were just green screens everywhere. When I saw the actual film, it was amazing how much actually wasn't in the room with us that's in the movie. So things that were kind of added with it. So Hollywood has implemented in this trompe l'oeil, this painting design intended to create the illusion of a three-dimensional object or space. So you might see that outside of windows, let's say, or um, a hillside in Lord of the Rings, something that gives this sense of three-dimensional space to it. And then there's things like Translite, which is an illuminated film backing, typically uses a backdrop. So just different ways of creating this sense of space that can be kind of cheated. We also have the green screening, that digital matte. You're going to watch this from Filmmaker IQ. It's going to give you the evolution of green screen. Pretty interesting, actually. There's also these miniatures, tiny little buildings or something created to give the idea of objects, buildings, whatever it is, kind of set off. We'll just come over to an example right here. So we see a building that's created, then the camera could kind of go along with it and get whatever the shot is that's needed for a given moment. Still used depending on if director wants a more realistic look. Sometimes that digital compositing, that green screen, the whatever is created via computer versus practically shot, sometimes doesn't look as authentic, so they'll want something real. And this has been a technique employed for years and years in major Hollywood productions. They have some really cool cameras for this too. Like, they look like tiny little scope cameras that can get into things. So just depending on what's needed, cost effectiveness, time, things like that. One of my favorite areas to talk about in production design is costumes. Think of yourself when you get up in the morning and you're deciding what to wear. You are telling the world something about yourself. You might think, I put no effort or no thought into what I wear. I grab whatever is cleanest off my floor. We've all been there. We all do that. But that's still saying something to the people out in the world, that's saying they just grabbed whatever they can find off the floor. No harm, no foul, nothing necessarily wrong with that, but that's what's being communicated. Every character has had time and effort and thought put into what they're wearing at a given moment. If you watch the next thing that you watch, look and see what the main character is wearing compared to everybody else in the scene, especially if there's a lot of people. Generally speaking, they'll have something that helps them stand out a little bit. Maybe a slightly different color, but just something that's going to help them really not blend in with everyone around them. Not all the time, but just look for it. We want to look at costumes and see, what is this saying about them, their place in time, and what's going on internally with them at a given moment. What are they trying to communicate to those in the story with them? So for instance, we can see either of these characters and know a lot about them just from the costume. They are not captains of the chess team. These are exactly what they are, kind of pirates in their own respect, cowboys, tough people, people you don't necessarily mess with. That's what their costumes say. It says something about them. Granted, we've seen the movie, so we know that, but instantly upon seeing it, you have that feeling of, I know who this character is. I know what's going on with them right now at this moment in the film, regardless of if you know the outcome of the film or not. It says something about them. Costume and change. When you watch Rushmore, check out Max's costume. See how it changes, see why it changes, and see what that is saying about Max at a given moment. So that costume should reflect what is going on at that moment. Here's a cool little video that you're going to watch that just gives you a rundown of what a production designer does, and it gives you some really cool examples from the films that they've done. All right, color is also really cool and something to think about. So the functions of color in film are many, but some to consider. They convey symbolic meaning. We know red can mean love, it can mean blood, it can mean danger, it can mean warning. It can establish narrative organization. One part of a film might be a certain color palette. The next part of a film might be another color palette. And it can convey mood and tone. So let's look at this from Malcolm X. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a little long, but it's really good. It's Denzel at his best. So at the beginning of the film, kind of the zoot zoot swing sort of time, we see these very vibrant colors, very lush, very saturated, very heavy use of color throughout. Then when his character goes to jail, we see a lot more blue and a lot more gray, very desaturated colors, very kind of mundane, cold. That blue is really in that cold spectrum of colors, so you feel this sort of lifelessness. And then as he I don't want to say reinvents himself, but has this rebirth of faith and becomes Malcolm X, we see more earth tones, more warm colors that kind of carry throughout the film. So it sort of separates the film into their own tone, their own mood, their own environment. And it's communicated to us through our understanding of color.